If you had to choose between leaving your fortune to your own blood or to a stranger who showed you kindness when no one else would, what would you do? This woman made her choice, and it tore her family apart. Nobody wanted to help the old woman who sat on the bench outside the hospital every Tuesday. She was thin, she was quiet, and she looked like she had nothing. 14 people walked past her every week without stopping. But when a 12-year-old boy named Elias sat down beside her and offered her half his sandwich, she did something nobody expected. She made him a promise. And 3 years later, at her funeral, when Elias stood up and read that promise out loud, every person in that church went silent. Welcome, welcome. Please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Now tell us, where are you tuning in from? Dallas, Durban, maybe Bridgetown or Toronto? We read every single comment. Now, you might be wondering why a billionaire was sitting on a bench outside a hospital looking like she had nothing. Let me tell you, because this is where the whole story begins. And it begins with a woman named Vivian. Poor, sweet Vivian, bless her heart. Vivian Adeyemi was 76 years old. She was a small woman, 5'1", barely 100 pounds. The kind of woman who seemed to be shrinking, as if the world was slowly reclaiming her. She had dark skin that had gone ashy from the medications, thin arms that bruised if you held them too firmly, and white hair she kept in a single braid that hung down her back like a rope. Her face was narrow, with cheekbones that stood out sharp beneath her skin, and her eyes were the thing people remembered. They were dark brown, almost amber in certain light, and they held a quality that most people couldn't name. It was clarity. Vivian's eyes saw everything. They saw through pretense, through performance, through the polite masks people wear when they want something. Those eyes had been seeing through people for 76 years, and they had grown very, very good at it. Vivian wore the same thing every Tuesday when she went to the hospital for her chemotherapy appointments. A plain gray dress, cotton, washed so many times it was soft as flannel, with a thin cardigan over it, navy blue, the elbows worn through. Flat shoes, black, scuffed at the toes. No jewelry, no purse. She kept her hospital card and a small amount of cash in the pocket of her cardigan. She looked, to anyone who glanced at her, like a woman who had nothing. A poor woman. A woman the world had used up and set aside. This was deliberate. Vivian Adeyemi chose to look this way. She chose the gray dress and the worn cardigan and the scuffed shoes the way some people choose armor. Because Vivian was not poor. Vivian was worth $1.4 billion. Now, you might be wondering how a woman worth $1.4 billion ends up on a bench outside a hospital in a gray dress, looking like she needs a hot meal and a warm coat. Let me tell you, because the answer is the key to everything. Vivian had spent 35 years building a pharmaceutical distribution company, Adeyemi Health Solutions, from a single warehouse in South Memphis to one of the largest medical supply companies in the Southeast. She started it at 41, after her husband Emmanuel died of a heart attack at 44, leaving her with 3 children under 12 and a mortgage she couldn't afford. Emmanuel had worked at a pharmaceutical warehouse, loading docks, inventory, shipping, and Vivian had watched him do it for years. She knew the business. She knew the suppliers. She knew where the inefficiencies were, where the margins were, where the opportunity was hiding. She took out a loan. She rented a warehouse. She hired 2 men from Emmanuel's old crew, men who had come to the funeral and said, "Whatever you need, Mrs. Adeyemi, we're here." She started with bandages and basic medical supplies, delivering them in a used van to clinics and nursing homes that the big distributors wouldn't bother with. The small ones, the rural ones, the ones in neighborhoods that delivery trucks drove past. She worked 18-hour days. She packed boxes. She drove the van. She negotiated with suppliers on the phone while her children did homework at the kitchen table and ate the dinner she had cooked at 5 in the morning before leaving for the warehouse. Within 5 years, Adeyemi Health Solutions was profitable. Within 10, it was dominant. Within 20, it was the supplier of choice for hospitals and clinics across Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and Georgia. Vivian built it with her hands. The same small, thin hands that now shook slightly when she lifted a cup of tea. And she built it honest. She never cut corners. She never inflated prices. She never sold a product she wouldn't give to her own children. That was a rule. If I wouldn't put it in my family's medicine cabinet, I won't put it in yours. By the time Vivian was 65, she was worth over $1 billion. She had 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a mansion in East Memphis, and a company that employed 412 people. She had everything. And then the cancer came. Ovarian cancer, stage 3, diagnosed when Vivian was 73. The doctors were cautious but honest. Treatment could extend her life, but the odds of a cure were low. Vivian listened to everything they said. She asked clear, specific questions, the same kind of questions she asked when reviewing a supplier contract. Then she said, "How long?" The doctor said, "With treatment, 3 to 5 years. Without, perhaps 1." Vivian chose treatment, not because she was afraid to die. Vivian Adeyemi had never been afraid of anything except raising her children wrong. She chose treatment because she had something left to do. She had a test to run. One final test. And that is the thing about a person's last years. They reveal everything. Pay attention to what happens next, because this is where the masks come off. Vivian had 3 children. The oldest was a son named David. He was 53, tall, broad-shouldered, with his father's jaw and his mother's sharp eyes. David ran the company, or rather, David had the title of CEO, which is not always the same thing as running the company. He wore expensive suits and drove a Mercedes and sat in a corner office on the 8th floor, and he made decisions the way a man makes decisions when he has never had to live with the consequences of failure. David had never failed at anything, because Vivian's success had insulated him from failure the way a greenhouse insulates flowers from frost. He was competent, he was smart, but he was not wise. And there is a world of difference between those two things. David's wife was a woman named Priscilla, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who could smile while calculating the value of everything in the room. Priscilla had come from money, not Adeyemi money, but enough money to develop the kind of confidence that looks like warmth from a distance but turns cold when you get close. She called Vivian mother, in that deliberate, slightly theatrical way that tells you the word is a performance, not a feeling. The middle child was a daughter named Grace. Ironic name, because Grace had very little of it. She was 49, lived in a townhouse in Germantown that Vivian had bought for her, and spent her days shopping, lunching, and managing what she called her wellness brand, an Instagram account with 11,000 followers where she posted photos of smoothies and yoga poses and captions about living your truth while spending her mother's money. Grace was not cruel. She was just absent. Present in body, absent in everything else. She showed up at holidays. She kissed Vivian's cheek. She said, "Love you, Mom." And then she was gone. Back to her life. Back to the smoothies and the yoga and the 11,000 people who didn't know her any better than her mother did. The youngest was a son named Marcus. He was 45. And Marcus was the one who broke Vivian's heart the most, because Marcus had been the one she believed in the most. Marcus had been a good boy. Smart, kind, curious. He studied engineering at Vanderbilt, graduated with honors, and started working at a startup in Nashville that was doing real things, building affordable water filtration systems for rural communities. Vivian was proud of him. She would tell anyone who listened, and some who didn't, about Marcus and his water filters and his heart for people who needed help. Then Marcus married a woman named Tanya, and Tanya changed everything. Tanya was beautiful and calculating. She had a smile like a knife, sharp, bright, designed to cut. She came from nothing, which Vivian didn't mind. Vivian came from nothing too. But Tanya had a hunger that was different from ambition. Ambition builds. Tanya's hunger consumed. She wanted the money, the houses, the status. And she wanted Marcus to stop playing with water filters and start working at the company where the real money was. Marcus quit the startup. He joined Adeyemi Health Solutions in a position Vivian created for him, Director of Community Outreach. It was supposed to be meaningful work. Instead, Marcus and Tanya turned it into a stepping stone. Within 2 years, Marcus was lobbying David for a bigger role. Within 4, he was angling for a seat on the board. Tanya threw dinner parties for board members. She organized charity galas that were really networking events. She positioned Marcus the way a chess player positions a bishop, 2 moves from the queen. Vivian watched all of this. She watched with those amber eyes that saw through everything. And she said nothing, because Vivian was running her test. But the family had no idea what was coming. When Vivian was diagnosed with cancer, she made a decision. She told her children about the diagnosis at a family dinner. David, Priscilla, Grace, Marcus, Tanya, all of them around the table in the dining room of her East Memphis mansion. She told them the facts. She told them the treatment plan. She told them the timeline. Then she watched their faces. David's face went tight, not with grief, but with calculation. She could see him doing the math, the company, the shares, the will, the succession plan. Priscilla reached for David's hand, and the gesture looked practiced, like something from a movie she had studied. Grace cried. Genuine tears. Vivian gave her credit for that. But within an hour, Grace was asking about the house. Mom, have you thought about what happens to the house? At a dinner where her mother had just said the word cancer, Marcus stared at his plate. Tanya squeezed his arm and whispered something Vivian couldn't hear. But Vivian could read lips, a skill she had developed in decades of conference rooms, and what Tanya whispered was, ask about the will. Marcus didn't ask, not that night. He waited 3 days. Then he called Vivian's attorney. Vivian's attorney, a woman named Homel3ss, who had been with Vivian for 20 years, told Vivian about the call. Vivian closed her eyes and nodded once. I expected it sooner, Vivian said. 3 days is actually longer than I thought he'd wait. And that is when Vivian began her final project. Not a business project, a human project. She wanted to know, truly know, before she died, whether her children loved her or loved her money. And she had a plan to find out. Now here is where Elias comes in. And here is where the story turns into something nobody saw coming. Every Tuesday, Vivian went to the hospital for chemotherapy. The sessions lasted 3 hours. Afterward, she felt sick, nauseous, exhausted, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. She could have had a driver take her home immediately. She could have rested in a private suite at the hospital. She had donated enough money to have one named after her. But instead, Vivian walked outside and sat on a wooden bench near the hospital entrance. She sat there for an hour after every session, in her gray dress and her worn cardigan, looking like nobody. She watched people come and go, patients, visitors, doctors, nurses, delivery drivers. She watched the way people looked at her, or didn't. Most people didn't. She was invisible, a small, thin, old woman on a bench. Furniture. She had been sitting on that bench for 4 months when Elias appeared. Elias Jackson was 12 years old. He was small for his age, thin with knobby knees and wrists so narrow you could wrap your thumb and index finger around them. His skin was dark brown, smooth, with a spray of freckles across his nose that he got from his mother. His hair was cut short and uneven. His older sister cut it for him with kitchen scissors because barbershops cost money they didn't have. He wore clothes that were clean but wrong. A t-shirt 2 sizes too big that hung past his elbows, jeans with the knees worn white, and sneakers with the soles coming apart on the left foot. He carried a backpack, blue, faded, with a broken zipper he kept closed with a safety pin, and inside that backpack were 2 textbooks, a notebook, 3 pencils, and half a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. Elias was homeless. Not the kind of homeless that lives on the street, the kind that moves from shelter to motel to a friend's couch to the backseat of a car. His mother, Denise, was a certified nursing assistant who worked at a nursing home for $11 an hour. Not enough for an apartment in Memphis, not with 2 kids and no help. Elias had an older sister, Keisha, who was 16 and worked at a fast food restaurant after school. The 3 of them shared a room at the Riverside Extended Stay, the cheapest one in the city, $200 a week, no kitchen, just a microwave and a mini fridge. They had been living there for 8 months. Elias came to the hospital every Tuesday because his mother's nursing home was 3 blocks away. And on Tuesdays, Denise worked a double shift and couldn't pick him up from school. So Elias walked to the hospital, sat in the waiting area, did his homework, and waited until Denise's shift ended at 9 o'clock. He had been doing this for months. The security guards knew him. The receptionist gave him a cup of water and sometimes a pack of crackers from the vending machine. He was a quiet boy, a good boy. The kind of boy who said yes ma'am and no sir and thank you to everyone, because Denise had taught him that manners don't cost money, and they're the one thing nobody can take from you. On a Tuesday in November, Elias walked outside to eat his sandwich. All the chairs in the waiting room were taken, and the fluorescent lights were giving him a headache. He pushed through the glass doors into the cool autumn air and looked for somewhere to sit. The only open spot was on the bench, next to the old woman in the gray dress. Elias sat down. He opened his backpack, pulled out the half sandwich, unwrapped it from the paper towel, and took a bite. He chewed quietly. He looked at the old woman beside him. She was thin, thinner than his grandmother had been before she died. Her hands were folded in her lap and they were trembling, a slight, constant tremor that she seemed to be trying to control. Elias looked at his sandwich, half a peanut butter sandwich, his dinner, all he would eat until tomorrow morning when the shelter served breakfast. If they went to the shelter, which they couldn't always afford because the shelter was $12 a night and the motel was cheaper for all 3 of them. He tore the sandwich in half. He held one piece out to Vivian. "Ma'am, are you hungry? It's peanut butter. It's not much, but it's pretty good." Vivian looked at the boy. She looked at the sandwich. 2 inches of bread with a thin layer of peanut butter, the bread slightly stale, the edges curling. She looked at his face, the freckles, the earnest eyes, the uneven haircut. "That's your dinner, isn't it?" Vivian said. "Yes, ma'am. But you look like you could use some." Vivian's eyes, those amber eyes that had seen through 1,000 business deals and 100 fake smiles, filled with tears. Not because she was hungry, because she had just spent 4 months sitting on that bench, and 14 people had walked past her every Tuesday, and not one of them, not the doctors in their white coats, not the executives in their luxury cars, not even the hospital chaplain, had offered her so much as a glass of water. And here was this boy, this 12-year-old boy in shoes that were falling apart, carrying half a peanut butter sandwich that was all he had, offering to share it with a stranger. "What's your name?" Vivian asked. "Elias. Elias Jackson." "Elias, why are you at the hospital?" He told her. About his mother, about the nursing home, about the extended stay, about Tuesday nights waiting for Denise's shift to end. He told her the way children tell things, simply, without self-pity, without drama. Just facts. "This is my life. These are the hours. This is the sandwich." Vivian took the piece of sandwich. She ate it. It was stale and the peanut butter was the cheap kind, the kind that sticks to the roof of your mouth. It was the best thing she had eaten in months. They sat together on that bench for an hour. They talked. Elias told her about school. He liked math, hated reading logs, had a teacher named Mrs. Williams who let him stay after school to use the library computer. Vivian told him about the pharmaceutical business. Simplified, of course, but Elias listened with the sharp attention of a boy who was used to paying attention because missing things had consequences. Before Vivian left, she said, "Elias, will you be here next Tuesday?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm here every Tuesday." "Then I'll see you next Tuesday." And she did. Every Tuesday for the next 3 years, Vivian and Elias sat on that bench. It became their ritual, as steady and reliable as the chemotherapy itself, but 1,000 times more healing. Every Tuesday, Elias brought whatever food he had, sometimes a peanut butter sandwich, sometimes crackers from the vending machine at school, sometimes an apple from the cafeteria, sometimes just a granola bar he had found at the bottom of his backpack, slightly crushed, wrapper torn, perfectly good. He always split it in half. He always gave Vivian the bigger half. She noticed this every time and said nothing, because pointing it out would have embarrassed him, and embarrassing Elias was something Vivian refused to do. They talked about everything. That was the miracle of it. A 76-year-old billionaire and a 12-year-old homeless boy sitting on a bench talking about the world as if they were equals. Because to Vivian, they were. That was the thing her children never understood. Vivian did not measure people by what they had. She measured them by what they gave. Elias told her about school. He was an A student, not because school was easy for him, but because he worked at it the way his mother worked at nursing, with a relentless, grinding determination that was bigger than talent. He liked math best. He said numbers made sense, they followed rules, they didn't change their mind.
He struggled with reading logs. Not the reading itself, but the logging, the requirement to write a summary after every chapter, which felt to Elias like being asked to explain a joke. If the book is good, he told Vivian, you shouldn't have to write a paper about why it's good. You should just feel it. Vivian laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't made in months. You sound like my husband, she said. He used to say, a good piece of music doesn't need a review, it needs a listener. Was your husband a musician? He was a warehouse worker, but he understood music better than most musicians. Elias told her about his teacher, Mrs. Williams, who let him stay after school to use the library computer because there was no computer at the extended stay, and Elias needed one for his homework. Mrs. Williams was young, maybe 28, with natural hair and glasses, and a habit of saying, you've got this, to every student, every day, regardless of whether they believed her. Elias believed her. He believed her because she was the kind of teacher who stayed until 5 o'clock even though she didn't have to, the kind who bought pencils with her own money, the kind who saw a homeless boy doing homework at a hospital and thought, I can help with that. Vivian told Elias about business, simplified because she wasn't trying to impress him, she was trying to teach him. She told him about supply and demand, about margins, about the difference between revenue and profit. Revenue is what comes in, profit is what stays. Most people only count what comes in. She told him about negotiation. Listen more than you talk. The person who talks the most in a negotiation is usually the one who loses. She told him about integrity. Your word is the only product that never depreciates.
If people trust your word, they'll trust your work. Elias listened to all of it with the sharp, hungry attention of a boy who knew that information was the most valuable thing a person without money could possess. He asked questions, good questions, the kind that made Vivian pause and think, the kind that her own children had never asked, because her children had never needed to learn the things Vivian was teaching Elias. David didn't need to know about margins. He had a CFO for that. Grace didn't need to know about supply and demand. She had an inheritance for that. Marcus didn't need to know about integrity. He had Tanya for that. And Tanya's definition of integrity was flexible. One Tuesday in the second year, it rained. Hard. The kind of October rain that comes sideways and soaks through everything. Elias showed up anyway. He walked from the school, 25 minutes in the rain, no umbrella, his backpack wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to keep his textbooks dry. He sat on the bench. He was shivering. Vivian looked at him. Elias, why did you come? It's pouring. Because you're here, Miss Viv, and you don't look like you brought an umbrella either. Vivian hadn't. She never brought an umbrella. She had 7 of them at the mansion. She chose not to bring one, the way she chose the gray dress, to see what would happen. To see who would notice, to see who would care. Elias pulled out his sandwich. Soggy. The bread was dissolving. He looked at it and laughed, a big, open 12-year-old laugh, and said, I think the rain ate my dinner. Vivian reached into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out a packet of crackers, the kind they gave her at the chemo ward, the little cellophane packages with 6 crackers inside. She always took one but never ate it. She had been keeping them for weeks, putting one in her pocket every Tuesday, just in case. Here, she said, trade you. They sat in the rain and ate crackers and laughed about the soggy sandwich, and Vivian felt something she hadn't felt since Emmanuel died. She felt known. Not recognized. Known. The difference is enormous. Recognition is about your name, your title, your net worth. Being known is about your heart. Elias knew her heart. He didn't know her name was on a building downtown. He didn't know her signature was on 1,000 checks. He knew she was cold on Tuesdays. He knew she liked the crunchy end of the sandwich. He knew she was lonely. One Tuesday in the 3rd year, 2 months before Vivian died, Elias said something that stopped Vivian's breath. They were sitting on the bench. The sun was low and golden. Elias had just finished telling her about a biology test. He got a 97, missed one question about mitochondria. Vivian was listening with her eyes half closed, the way she did when the chemo fatigue was heavy. "Miss Viv?" "Yes, baby. When I'm a doctor, I'm going to come back to this bench every Tuesday, and I'm going to sit here and eat a sandwich and remember you." Vivian opened her eyes. She looked at this boy, 15 now, taller, still thin, still wearing clothes that didn't fit, still carrying a backpack with a safety pin on the zipper. This boy who wanted to be a doctor so he could be the person who comes when nobody else does. "You don't need to remember me on a bench, Elias," Vivian said. "Just remember me when you see someone who looks hungry, and give them your sandwich." "I already do that, Miss Viv. You taught me." "I didn't teach you that. You taught me. You were doing it before we met." Elias smiled. That freckled, gap-toothed 15-year-old smile. "Then I guess we taught each other." Vivian reached over and squeezed his hand. Her hand was small and shaking and cold from the chemo. His hand was bigger now, growing, warming, becoming the hand of a young man. They held on for a moment, 2 people on a bench, one dying and one just beginning, connected by 3 years of sandwiches and rain and the kind of love that doesn't need a blood test to prove it's real. But during those same 3 years, Vivian was watching her children, and what she saw confirmed everything she feared. David visited once a month. He brought flowers, always the same arrangement, ordered by Priscilla's assistant from a florist that charged $120 for roses that would die in 4 days. He sat in Vivian's living room for exactly 45 minutes. He talked about the company. He never asked how Vivian was feeling. He never asked about the chemo. He never asked if she was afraid. Grace visited less, once every 6 weeks maybe. She brought smoothies from her wellness brand, turmeric and ginger and something called adaptogenic mushroom blend, and she set them on Vivian's nightstand with a little card that said, "Heal from within." Vivian poured them down the sink after Grace left. She didn't need mushroom smoothies. She needed her daughter to sit beside her bed and hold her hand and say nothing. Just be there. Grace could not be there. Being there was not something Grace had ever learned to do. Marcus came the most often, but always with Tanya, and Tanya always steered the conversation toward the company, toward the board, toward succession, toward the will. Tanya never said the word will out loud, but it hung in every room she entered like perfume, invisible, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. None of them, not one, ever sat on the bench outside the hospital and waited for Vivian after her chemo sessions. Not one of them knew about the bench. Not one of them knew that their mother spent an hour every Tuesday sitting in the cold with a 12-year-old homeless boy who shared his dinner with her. But this story is far from over. 2 months before Vivian died, she called Homel3ss, her attorney, to the house. She sat in her reading chair with a cup of tea and a legal pad full of notes, and she dictated a new will. Helen listened, asked questions, and when Vivian was finished, Helen set down her pen and said, "Vivian, are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. Your children will contest this. Let them. The truth has a way of winning in court." The will was signed, witnessed, sealed, and placed in Helen's vault. Vivian told no one what was in it. She told Helen one more thing. "When I die, I want Elias to read it. At the funeral, out loud, in front of everyone." Helen stared at her. "A 15-year-old boy? He's the only person I trust to say the words the way they need to be said. Without performance, without agenda. Just the truth." Vivian died on a Thursday morning in April. She died at home, in her reading chair, with a cup of tea beside her that had gone cold. The hospice nurse found her. She looked peaceful. Her hands folded in her lap, her braid lying over her shoulder, her amber eyes finally closed. The funeral was held at Greater Community Church on Saturday. The church was packed. business associates, board members, politicians, community leaders, hospital administrators, people who had known Vivian for decades, and people who had met her once at a gala. David sat in the front pew in a dark suit, Priscilla beside him in black, her pearls catching the light. Grace sat next to them, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, her wellness brand sunglasses pushed up on her head. Marcus and Tanya sat at the end of the pew, Tanya in a designer dress that cost more than Elias's family spent on housing in 3 months. Nobody cried the way a family should cry when they lose the person who made everything possible. Halfway through the service, Homel3ss stood up. She walked to the podium. The church went quiet. Vivian Adeyemi left specific instructions for her will to be read at this service, Helen said. She also left specific instructions about who should read it. Helen turned and looked toward the back of the church. Every head in the room followed her gaze. Elias Jackson was standing at the back of the church. He was 15 now, taller but still thin, still wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. He was wearing the best clothes he had, dark pants that were slightly too short, a white button-down shirt that his mother had ironed that morning on the motel bed, and shoes that were new. Vivian had bought them for him 2 weeks before she died. They were the only thing she had ever bought for him, and she had made him promise to wear them to her funeral. Elias walked down the aisle.
The church watched him. This boy, this nobody, this stranger in pants that were slightly too short and a shirt his mother had ironed on a motel bed that morning, walking to the front of a room full of millionaires and executives and society people who had never seen his face before and had no idea why he was there. His new shoes, black, simple, the only thing Vivian had ever bought him, clicked on the church floor. The sound was the only sound in the room. 300 people, and the only sound was the shoes of a 15-year-old boy walking toward a truth that would break the room open. David leaned toward Priscilla and whispered, "Who is that?" Priscilla shook her head. Her pearls caught the light. Grace squinted at Elias, searching her memory for his face and finding nothing. Marcus sat rigid, his hands on his knees, his jaw set. Hanya was already calculating. You could see it in her eyes, the rapid movement, the assessment, the way a predator's eyes move when it senses a shift in the landscape. Elias reached the podium. He was shaking, his hands, his legs, his voice stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. He was 15 years old. He was standing in front of 300 adults in a church he had never entered before, holding a legal document that contained words he had never heard before, asked to do something by a woman who had been his only friend in the world. Helen handed him the will. 6 pages, typed, legal language, heavy with consequence. Elias unfolded it. He looked at the first line. His lips moved silently. Reading ahead, the way Mrs. Williams had taught him in the library. Always read the next sentence before you speak the current one. It keeps you from stumbling. He took a breath. He began. I, Vivian Nkechi Adeyemi, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. His voice was thin at first, barely a whisper amplified by the church microphone. Then it steadied. The way a river steadies after rapids, still moving, still carrying weight, but calmer now, deeper, finding its true channel. He read the section for David, the company, the condition, 1 day a month in the warehouse, loading trucks and packing boxes, doing the work Emmanuel did. If you refuse, or if you stop, the shares revert to the foundation. Your father built this company with his body. You should know what that feels like before you run it with your signature. David's face drained of color. Not red, white. The white of a man who has just been told that his inheritance comes with labor. Priscilla's hand clamped onto his arm. Her knuckles were as white as his face. Elias read the section for Grace. The house. The challenge. Raise $100,000 for St. Jude through her wellness platform in 12 months. I love you, Grace, but love without purpose is just a word with nowhere to go. Grace made a sound, a small, choked sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Her tissue fell from her hand. She stared at the podium, at this boy reading her mother's judgment, and for the first time in years, Grace looked awake. Not performing, not posing. Awake. Elias turned the page. He read the section for Marcus and Tanya. The crowd leaned forward.
Even the people in the back pews who could barely hear leaned forward, because the air in the room had changed. It had become charged, electric, the way air charges before a storm. To my son Marcus and his wife Tanya. Pause. 1 second. 2. Elias's eyes scanned ahead. He read what was coming. His throat tightened. He swallowed. He kept going. I leave you nothing.
The gasp moved through the church like a wave, starting in the front pews and rolling backward, person to person, row to row, until it hit the back wall and bounced back. 300 people gasping at the same time produces a sound that is almost physical. You can feel it on your skin. Tanya's face went from pale to scarlet in 2 seconds. She gripped the pew in front of her. Marcus stared straight ahead, frozen, his eyes locked on the cross above the altar, as if he could find an escape route in the rafters. Elias read Vivian's words. Every word. The salary, the company funds used for personal expenses, the lobbying, and the line about Tanya calling the attorney 3 days after the diagnosis. I am not angry. I am disappointed. And disappointment, I have learned, is the heaviest thing a mother can carry. Tanya stood up. The pew creaked. Every head turned to her. She opened her mouth. To object, to deny, to perform the kind of righteous indignation that she had perfected over a decade of dinner parties and boardroom politics. Marcus grabbed her wrist, not gently, firmly. The grip of a man who understood, in that one terrible moment, that his wife was about to make everything worse. He pulled her back into the pew. She sat. Her chest was heaving. Her perfectly applied makeup was cracking at the edges. Elias continued. His hands were steadier now. Something had shifted in him during the reading. The fear had burned off and left something harder, something brighter. Determination. The same determination that made him walk 25 minutes in the rain to sit on a bench with an old woman. The determination of a boy who decided at 9 years old to become the person who comes. He read the final section, the one about himself. 300 people leaned forward. I leave the remainder of my estate, all personal savings, all investments, all properties not previously mentioned, and the Vivian Adeyemi Charitable Foundation, to Elias Kwame Jackson. The room erupted, not in applause, in noise, gasps, whispers, the shuffling of bodies turning in pews to stare at the boy at the podium. David stood up halfway and sat back down. Grace's mouth fell open. Marcus turned to look at Elias with an expression of pure confusion. Elias kept reading, because Miss Viv had told him to read it all. Every word. Elias Jackson is 15 years old. He is homeless. His mother works 60 hours a week as a nursing assistant and cannot afford an apartment. His sister works at a fast food restaurant to help pay for a motel room. Elias comes to the hospital every Tuesday and waits for his mother's shift to end. For the past 3 years, he has sat on a bench beside me, a woman he believed was poor, a woman he believed had nothing, and he has shared his food with me. Half a peanut butter sandwich, crackers from a vending machine, an apple from the school cafeteria. He shared what he had because he believed I needed it more than he did. And he was right. Not because I was hungry, because I was starving. Starving for proof that goodness still exists in this world. Elias proved it every Tuesday for 3 years. Elias's eyes were wet. He blinked hard. He kept reading. The total value of the estate being left to Elias is approximately $870 million. The church went silent. Not whisper silent, tomb silent. The kind of silence that happens when 300 people simultaneously stop breathing. This money is not a gift. It is an investment. The foundation will be managed by Homel3ss and a board of trustees until Elias turns 25, at which point he will assume full control. The money will be used for 4 purposes. First, to house Elias's family permanently and immediately. Second, to fund Elias's education through medical school and beyond. Third, to endow the Denise Jackson Scholarship, named after his mother, which will provide full tuition, housing, and living expenses for 20 students per year from low-income families pursuing careers in healthcare. And fourth,
to build and operate the Emmanuel Adeyemi Community Clinic, named after my late husband, in South Memphis, to serve families who cannot afford medical care. Elias set the paper down. He looked at the church, at the faces, the open mouths, the wet eyes, the shock. He looked at David, whose face was gray. He looked at Grace, who was crying, real tears, maybe for the first time. He looked at Marcus, who was staring at the floor. He looked at Tanya, who was staring at Elias with an expression that mixed fury and disbelief. Then Elias picked up the last page. There was one more paragraph, written in Vivian's handwriting, not typed. A personal note, in ink, added after the will was drafted. Elias, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are standing in front of people who are wondering why an old woman left her fortune to a boy. The answer is simple. You saw me. When I was invisible, when I was nobody on a bench in a gray dress, you saw me. You didn't see wealth or poverty. You didn't see opportunity or obligation. You saw a person, a hungry person, and you gave her your food. That is the rarest thing in the world, Elias. Rarer than money, rarer than power, rarer than anything my children or my company or my $1 billion could buy. You saw a human being, and you chose to be kind. That is the foundation I want to build on. Not concrete, not contracts. Kindness. I love you, Elias.
I have loved you since the first peanut butter sandwich, and I will love you from wherever I go next. Miss Viv.
Elias folded the paper. He stood at the podium with tears running down his face. He didn't wipe them. He let them fall the way Miss Viv would have let them fall, honestly, without apology, without performance. He looked at the congregation. 300 people looking back at him, some crying, some stunned, some furious. All of them seeing him, really seeing him, for the first time. I didn't know she was rich, Elias said. His voice was small but clear. I didn't know any of this. I just knew she was cold and she looked hungry, and she sat on that bench alone every Tuesday and nobody stopped. I stopped because my mama taught me that you don't walk past somebody who needs help, even if you don't have much. Especially if you don't have much. Because that's when giving means the most. He stepped down from the podium. He walked back down the aisle.
His new shoes, Vivian's last gift, clicked softly on the church floor. 300 heads turned to watch him go. Denise was waiting at the back of the church. She was in her nursing scrubs. She had come straight from a shift, no time to change. She was crying. The hard, open, uncontrollable kind of crying that happens when the world hands you something so big you can't hold it, and so beautiful you can't let go. Elias walked into his mother's arms. She held him, this boy, her boy, the boy who shared his dinner with a stranger and didn't know it would change the world. I'm proud of you, Denise whispered. Your grandmother would be so proud. Outside the church, the afternoon sun fell across the parking lot. Inside, the congregation sat in their pews, absorbing what they had heard. David and Priscilla were conferring with their attorney in hushed tones. Grace was sitting alone, staring at the flowers on the altar, something shifting behind her eyes. Marcus had left through a side door. Tanya was gone.
Homel3ss found Elias and Denise in the vestibule. She knelt down in front of Elias, this woman in her tailored suit, kneeling on a church floor, looking a 15-year-old boy in the eyes. Elias, she said, there's an apartment waiting for you, 3 bedrooms, fully furnished. Your mother's first month is paid. Keisha's community college tuition is covered, and there is a letter from Miss Viv on the kitchen counter. Elias looked at his mother. Denise was shaking her head, not in refusal, in disbelief. The disbelief of a woman who has worked 60 hours a week for a decade and prayed every night for something to change, and had started to wonder if the prayers were going anywhere. It's real, Helen said. Every word. That evening, the Jackson family walked into their new apartment for the first time. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a real stove and a real refrigerator,
a living room with a couch and a television, and shelves where Elias could put his books. Windows that looked out onto a street with trees and sidewalks and streetlights that all worked. On the kitchen counter, just like Helen said, there was a letter.
A small envelope with Elias written on it in Vivian's handwriting. The slightly shaky handwriting of a woman whose hands trembled from chemo, but whose mind never wavered. Elias opened it. Dear Elias, welcome home. I know this is a lot. I know the numbers are big and the lawyers are intimidating and the church was scary. But I want you to remember one thing. The thing that matters more than the money, more than the foundation, more than any building or scholarship or clinic. You are kind. You were kind when you had nothing. Stay kind now that you have everything. Because kindness is not a currency that inflates. The more you spend, the more it's worth. I believe in you. I believe in your mother. I believe in Keisha.
And I believe that a boy who shares his last sandwich with a stranger is the kind of man who will change the world. Go be a doctor, Elias. Go be the person who comes when nobody else will. And every time you sit down to eat, save a piece of your sandwich. Not for me. For the next person on the next bench who looks like they need it. Love always, Miss Viv. Elias held the letter against his chest. He stood in the kitchen of his first real home and closed his eyes and breathed. Beside him, Denise was leaning against the counter, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming. Keisha was standing in the doorway of her own bedroom, touching the doorframe like she was making sure it was solid. And somewhere, in a church on the other side of the city, the flowers on Vivian Adeyemi's casket were beginning to wilt. But the seeds she had planted, in a boy, in a sandwich, in a bench outside a hospital, those seeds were just beginning to grow. And that's where we'll leave this story. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from this? See you next time.